So then when she talked about what plans she had for you, what did that say? Did that sound like?
I don't know. I'm like trying to now remember what our conversation was because it was a while ago. She just seemed very enthusiastic about the book. She knew immediately who she wanted to send it to. I remember at one point I was kicking myself after, I said something on the call with her about how I was worried that it was too sexual for YA, or I said something like, oh, I know it might be hard to sell because it's like too risque. And then after I was like, why would I ever tell her it would be hard to sell? Like, that's so dumb. Um, and she immediately was like, oh, no, it's totally fine. It's like, that's not going to be an issue. And so that was exciting for me because that was like one of the things I was worried about.
That's great. And I know that was one of the things to worry about.
Yeah.
So did she mention any specific publishers? Like, did you have a publisher list when you went into this? Did you identify which publishers you wanted?
No, I mean, I knew that I wanted a big 5 publisher. And so she said, I'm going to send it to all the big 5. But I didn't know any like more specifics than that until after I signed with her. And then she sent me a list of editors.
Mm-hmm. So when you got to, how many offers did you get? Did she auction or did she put it out one by one?
For the deal? Yeah. So what happened was, so this was all in November. It was a very fast-paced, kind of crazy month. So I signed with her, and then she sent me back like a few very minor edits, and that took about a week. And then I sent that back to her, and we sent the book out right before Thanksgiving. And her goal was to try to get it out before the holidays so that people would have time to read it over like Thanksgiving and Christmas. And she was saying like the holidays are generally a really slow time, so don't expect anything. And then we got an offer 2 days later, which it was very unexpected. It was, I didn't think that it would happen that fast. So we got an offer, and it was what's called a preempt, where a publisher will offer what they think is a really good deal, so that you'll take it, and they're trying to prevent the book from going to auction. And generally with a preempt, you have 24 hours to sign it or they'll take the deal away. So it's kind of this way to try to like tempt you so they can get it first. And this was a 1-book deal. I'm not going to go into details of like who all of the different publishers were, but with a publisher. And then my agent told us that we should turn it down. And that was a very hard decision for me to make because I am not like don't have a gambler personality. And it's like your biggest dream being offered to you. And just like, I don't know, the idea of turning down a book deal was just really not in my nature.
What did that conversation sound like with your agent?
She just said she thought we could get a better deal, and that the preempt wasn't good enough to take the book off the table so quickly.
Did you put your like fingers and toes and think she's a professional, I'll go with her? Or did you try to say, actually, I really like this deal, let's take this deal?
I just trusted her. I was like, I'm not good at making these types of decisions myself. I will always just take the easier decision. And so I was like, I'll trust the professional who's done this a bunch of times. She knows what she's doing. But there was definitely that fear of, what if we turn this down and then we don't get another offer? Mm-hmm. But she was saying the fact that this happened so quickly, that we were bound to get another offer. Like we wouldn't get an offer in 2 days and then not get something else. So we turned it down. Mm-hmm. And then we got interest from another editor. And so the first people that we turned down said they were going to come back to us with a better offer, which was a good response. And that's what she said. She was like, likely we'll turn it down and they'll come back with something better. So they told us they were formulating that. We had interest from another editor. And so I ended up she scheduled 2 phone calls for me with each of the editors, where it was another thing where I was really nervous for the phone call, and then I went in and it was basically both of them like trying to sell to me. Like I thought I was gonna have to be like convincing them, and it was the other way around where they were both like, here's the reasons we want it, like here's what we're gonna do with it, et cetera, et cetera. And I ended up having to pitch they asked like, do you have a second book idea? And so I had to pitch the second book that I was working on. And then left that phone call very confused because I liked both of them. They were both really nice and both had great ideas for what they wanted to do with it. Both had very similar ideas in terms of edits. And then after that, the second one came with a preempt, which was for a 2-book deal instead of 1. And that was Razor Bill. And so we ended up going with them because the whole thing with the preempt was we had to agree to it before the first people were able to give us another offer, because you can't compare offers. But the second offer was good enough that we decided to take it. And I remember I showed you, they were really, really sweet the publisher gathered everyone who worked their prom photos, and they put this whole document together for me with all of their prom photos and like favorite prom memories and stuff. And so it's just like, I knew based on that they really wanted to work with me and that they were gonna like pay me attention, like that they really wanted the book. So I went with them. But I do feel really bad that first editor that I was talking to at the other company was also so nice. And so it's business decisions.
Yeah. And well, now you know her and she knows you, and you might not write for Razor Bill for the rest of your life, and then you have another editor in your pocket. So that's great. Well, I can keep going, but I know there are lots of people who want to ask questions, and this is officially the time where I'm supposed to hand over, so I will be good. So if you want to ask a question, can you either put your hand up physically, or even better than that, raise your hand electronically so that I can see you more easily. Nobody has a single question? Stephen. Okay, Steve, you go off. Lead off.
Right. Hey, Cameron.
Hi.
I was just wondering how much your book changed in terms of like edits. Were there like structural edits or, at like along the way once you got an agent, and then again when you found a publisher?
So it really didn't change that much. I will credit Shirin for that. I was told that by the agent and by the editor that it was a very polished draft. And I think that's because I was working with all of you guys and with Shirin for several years. And I'm one of those people where I feel like it never felt like it was good enough to query. And so I waited until it was like really, really to the point where I felt like it was good enough, which meant that there were a lot of drafts written of it before anyone saw it. Which not true for the second book, because the second book I have way less time. I only with the agent I changed like a few paragraphs, and then the main edit that we did with my editor was one of the character James Dean in the original version was just kind of more one note of like problematic red flags kind of guy. And so they felt it was like a little too clear which direction of the love triangle she should go with. So they wanted me to make him more likable. And so there's a lot more. I think in my first version of things, it was too clear that me as the author didn't like his character. So I had to add a lot more of Keely's thoughts, like positive thoughts about him, because I don't think I personally had positive thoughts about him. And then we added like a few more scenes that made him more likable. But yeah, the edits were generally pretty minimal.
Sarah Ernst, you had a question.
Yeah, my question kind of is along the same thrust as the last one. It was about the editing process and just kind of how you dealt with suggestions for significant changes, and this might have been earlier on in the development, but just kind of like what the process was like for you, if you got like emotionally attached to certain item or elements that the recommendation was to strip it out, and just what your experience with that was like.
So what I've learned now is that you just can't get emotionally attached to anything. One thing that I do appreciate is like any change that my editor suggests, it's never phrased in a way where it's like she's telling me I have to do something. It's always like, here's what I suggest. If you're not comfortable with it, like, let's have a conversation. We can schedule a phone call. I can speak more to, so the second book that I'm writing was a very different process in that I pitched the idea to her on the phone over a year ago, and then she didn't want any information about it until I had a final draft. So I never sent a synopsis, I never sent her beat sheet, we never talked over plot points. It was just, once you have your first draft, send it to me. Which was kind of cool because I had so much freedom, but it was also kind of stressful because I feel like I didn't have anyone to tell me whether I was going in the right direction. And so I sent her that completed draft, and then I worked with a lot of you guys on that draft, so you've read parts of it, but there was a lot where I was trying to figure out, like, what is this book about? Where are these plot points going? And so once she read that first draft, we had like a 3-hour phone call where we talked over everything of like, okay, well, how do we make this work? What's this person's motivation? And so we kind of brainstormed that together, and then the next version made much more sense.
But it doesn't sound like too painful a process.
No, I think it would be painful if I were married to all of the ideas, but the fact that it's like, I want the best book possible and she wants the best book possible. So we just have to like listen to each other and kill our darlings if we have to.
Has your, it doesn't sound like your agent had a big like editorial role in this second book. Is that correct?
Yeah, so she wasn't involved at all, which is very unusual. It's just because it was on such a tight timeline that we just bypassed her, and it was just, once you have this draft ready, send it to the editor. I think usually you work with your agent first to kind of figure all of that out. But it was because we already had this on contract and my editor was so involved that it was like we didn't need to have that extra step. But I would in like a future book, because I'm only contracted for 2. So if I want to get another deal, then my agent and I would definitely work together and brainstorm on that before we tried to send it out to anybody.